Um, right. So we are talking about the slightly boring but very important topic of data. So we're going to try and keep you awake. We've got some interesting things to throw at you. My name's David Loiterton. I'm going to get the other guys to introduce themselves in a second, but I'm going to set this panel up a little bit. So I did a similar panel to this last year, and at that time, it was like there wasn't a week that went by where there wasn't a story about data and people getting sued and money being lost and what have you. So part of what I want to explore today is how we've progressed from then, and we certainly have, but sort of unpack that a little bit. But also look at what the challenges are that continue, and possible solutions that are being talked about, being built, being done. For me, and I think for everybody, we want to get to a point where a creator, whether it's a songwriter or an artist, gets paid for everything. Every use of every recording of every song in every country, every time. We're not quite there yet, but that's really the goal. And so we keep that in mind, and that's what we're heading towards. So I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves firstly, starting with Peter.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter van Rijn. I'm the CEO of Fuga, a technology and services company in the music industry. What we do revolves around a platform we call the Fuga platform, which enables labels and distributors and artist management companies to manage their data, create their releases, and manage all the DSP settings, and then distribute that data and content to digital service providers. That's the base of what we do, and I'll keep it at that for now.
Is this on? No? Speak loudly. Okay. Now? Thank you, Peter. Okay, maybe it just turned on, it looks like. I'm Molly Newman. I'm the global head of business development for Songtrust, and we're a technology platform also, but for global music publishing administration. Our focus is on serving the community of songwriters who, sort of as you described, David, is earning publishing income around the world and trying to connect them to those royalties that they're earning that they rightfully should be able to access.
I'm Greg Pryor from a law firm called Reed Smith. I'm based in London. Our team advises a number of different constituent parties that have an interest in data, including artists and songwriters, DSPs, publishers, labels, aggregators, and I've seen lots of arguments about data, so I'm looking forward to some good arguments to that.
Hi, Scott Ryan. I'm the global VP of the music business for Gracenote. Gracenote's been a Nielsen portfolio company since we were acquired 18 months ago. So for those of you that know Nielsen and the broader analytics measurement heritage from that business, it's been really exciting to bring the Gracenote world of reference metadata and search and discovery together with a lot of the opportunities that come out of consumption and research.
Great, thanks guys. So we're going to start with some basics and just talk about what we're talking about. And I want to start with recordings, because recordings is sort of the shop front for how we consume music, and that's part of the, not part of the data problem, but part of the data ecosystem. So Scott, would you like to kick off and just give us an overview of what ideally recordings data looks like?
Yeah, happy to, and it looks messy. A big part of what we're doing is using a lot of both of our technology and our data on a global basis to be able to really understand and group all the different duplicates and all the various components that go into some of these music catalogs that with some of our DSP partners is up to and approaching 90 million tracks. So what we're doing is putting a tremendous amount of investment on a global basis in being able to group and clean up and essentially build a reference data set that from a recording standpoint is understanding all the various versions of a particular song, but more importantly, being able to bring in and really use fingerprinting and other tech to be able to bring those together and provide one normalized set.
So give us an example of what a normalized set would look like.
Yeah, happy to.
You know,
so
disambiguation or whatever.
So a version of the song happens to be on the original release of the album. It gets picked up for greatest hits. It then goes, and there's a wonderful sync opportunity with a movie or a TV show, and there's an original soundtrack released. In many cases, there'll be different ISRCs issued, different regions, all the complexities that have made the data component of this so challenging in the past. What Gracenote's able to do is use our fingerprinting to understand that is in fact the exact same song, and be able to understand that the various ISRCs or different components that are associated really are one true work. So a big part of what we're looking to do is take that grouping and then look at opportunities to be able to help the songwriter.
Right. So on the publishing side, Molly, so we've got recordings data. Hopefully, you know, we're getting to a point where that's getting a bit cleaner. But on the publishing side, the composition side, we have a different set of complexities, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple writers. If you look at any popular, hit in the last year, and sometimes there's up to 20 writers with, varying percentages. And in there's issues. I mean, even in this journey here, we've sat down with a couple of organizations that talk about the different ways that things are claimed and the different ways that if you have a smaller percentage of a work, it might be overridden by the one of the largest company or the largest percentage owner. And there's so many different ways that things can go wrong. And it's, as we were discussing earlier, it's up to the entire ecosystem to commit to making that more correct.
So in an ideal world, how would that happen? What would the sort of nice piece of publisher data look like?
Right. Well, all the percentages are clearly stated and they're accepted, and all of the different stakeholders around the globe have accepted them for the agreement that was made from day one between all of the pieces.
Right. So it's the pieces, the splits, which is the part of the problem.
Right. And that requires, and we work with a profile of writer that is perhaps, it's not the level of the biggest hits in the market, but if a group sits down and writes a song together, they have to establish what those percentages are between the band members, if that's the way that they wrote. And that requires a level of commitment and clarity that is not always in place for,
Right. It doesn't always happen, does it? Okay, so we've got recordings data, we've got the sort of other side of the ledger, if you like, the songwriter and publishing data. And so the crux of the problem, or one of the problems, is linking those two things together. And historically, we've had issues with making those links or matches, or having different links and matches around the world. So Peter, I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yes, and while you were saying indeed that about compositions and recordings, it could indeed be, of course, that there's one composition linked to many recordings. And that's another complexity. And then there's obviously more the wider industry structure, whereby different, let's say, administration offices or different flows of rights have kind of parallel tracks. And what we're seeing, and we are traditionally coming from the recording rights business, is that it's absolutely important that what you send and how what kind of responsibility you as a distributor can take, because what goes in is actually should be so trustworthy that it actually can pay out, right? So that's very important. And
so sorry to interrupt you, Peter, but in a streaming world, which is the world that we're in,
yeah,
that's a particular problem, right? A stream happens. we know maybe who the recording artist is, but we don't necessarily know who the songwriters are.
Yes. So the DSP should know, and then pays out to the PRO, for instance, or the rights collection agency. But that is where often it can go wrong, because both parties do not necessarily know, actually where these rights are matched. So we try to, at least at the moment, try to take responsibility for adding publishing rights, or some basic publishing rights, which is also what Apple and Spotify are now rightfully demanding from us. But that should be done in a far wider spectrum, encompassing indeed rights up to songwriter splits, which is a complex a road to embark on, but nevertheless it will happen, and just interesting to see how long it will take until there's a standard match. Yeah.
And Gregor, you see this, through your practice. What's your view of all of this? And we're talking specifically about here that sort of core challenge, from DSP point of view or a PRO point of view.
I think, there's always difficult to attribute where something goes wrong. And that really hits, the songwriter, who needs to get paid the hardest, I think. What we see is on the inbound, complaints by DSPs probably about the quality of the data they receive across the board. We then see complaints from PROs about the quality of the data they receive from the DSPs. We were talking before this panel, and I think this really is a digital transformation issue for the music industry. It's something that financial services industry has gone through before. We're in the middle of it. We're certainly nowhere near the end of it. But the rubber hits the road on these disputes when people don't get paid on something that they own. And there's an absurdity to that, in my view.
Right, yeah. And you mentioned the banking analogy, which we were talking about, and that sort of gives us a sense of how complicated it is.
Right.
But the banking industry has solved it or solving it, so we should be able to.
I think so. I mean, I think that there may be a sense that it's somehow less important in some way, in music, but actually it isn't. You're still talking about financial instruments, or you're talking about the transfer of property in exchange for value. And in that respect, we're just less regular. I mean, let's be honest, we're less regulated than the banking industry, and therefore, arguably the consequences are less severe, but I don't really subscribe to that.
And streaming, of course, has changed the dynamic in the sense that now we're talking about billions of transactions as opposed to hundreds of transactions. And so the sheer volume of it is quite overwhelming as well.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add also, I think when streams were being measured in low millions just 5 years ago, 7 years ago, it was a very different scenario, and there were different stakes at play. So perhaps this wasn't, the level of complexity against the amount of money wasn't, in an area of investment for folks. But at today's current volumes and where the projections are, and Peter, you're a lot closer to that than we are.
Well, I mean, I think the volume has risen, of course, but there is more concentration because there are only so many DSPs that sit on that money and pay out. So it sounds a bit generic, but it shouldn't be that difficult, and right, because I don't, and I think I'm speaking from the Fuga perspective. We generally get, and also here in Asia, we get quite solid reports with all the data in it that we process, and we can pay that out and allocate that up to the cent. It becomes indeed difficult with regards to the discussion we had earlier, where you want to be sure, for instance, a songwriter wants to be sure how much is streamed on the platform as well. And those are still different streams. So I think the complexity, I see it rather in that area than when you receive it from a recording side only, for instance.
Okay, so just carrying on from that, we talk about the DSPs and streaming, and that's really a key piece of it. But we've also touched on, but haven't really delved into, the PRO world, which is another dimension of this. Who wants to jump on that one?
Well, I mean, I think that there are, you know, the regulatory framework that exists have sort of supported this loose attribution, and that's really one of the challenges of, you know, being precise and being, you know, fully digital and transforming this industry.
Molly, can we make that a hashtag?
Sure.
Loose
Loose,
attribution.
sure. Go ahead.
I'm going to credit you.
Thank you. I am a marketer. But I think that is the sort of the mindset of our industry that needs to shift as well, is that every writer and every percentage of every composition deserves what they're earning, and
that hasn't been the case historically.
No, and it's not the case legally. I mean, there are the ways that you know, through various formulas that exist and various agreements that one makes, you get a estimation of something that's surveyed and
right. So let's unpack that, because it is what it is. So we have a situation where you know, the top percentage of streams or usages you know, are
right.
accounted for, if you like. That's probably the wrong terminology. And then there's a long tail, which
right.
gets very difficult.
Well, there's various. I mean, I think different organizations have different rules and thresholds for disbursements and all the things. And so, what our company is really focused on is if you will be paid on what you're earning, you have to be fully represented. And there are a number of ways to do that globally, and we are just focused on making it as easy as possible and making it available. And that's sort of the foundational principle of why we do that. And you know, as an artist, so I have a number of records in my, you know, catalog personally, and you know, it's small and hasn't earned a tremendous amount, but whatever it earns, a few $100s here or there, I appreciate that. And I don't know why anyone wouldn't say, I heard my song on a radio or I saw it streamed, and I shouldn't be getting what I'm earning.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the level of efficiency, talking about the PROs, the levels of efficiency vary greatly. You know, there's been a huge investment by many of them into consolidating data processing, in trying to deliver reports on time, distributing on time. Unfortunately, there are many that are absolutely not that. And when you're in a circumstance where DSPs are being asked to deliver or know that of all the data they deliver, only a limited amount of that might be processed, you know, and if it's the most popular of that amount that's processed, then, you know, mathematically it's obvious that favors the more popular artists, right? To the detriment of the long tail.
And I just want to quickly say, you know, no, I don't mean to suggest that this is there's an easy solution for, you know, every organization has, you know, limited resources and you know, they're all technology capacity issues and big investments that likely need to be made. But I think that the commitment towards that is what, you know, we need to continue to establish we are as an industry committed to.
To pull on the banking analogy, though, could you imagine if people who only had $1,000 in their bank account only had about a 50% shot of being able to get paid on it?
In
Or
time.
like, yes,
Also,
and in time. I mean, there's some components, and the complexity is real. We're talking about the exact same recording in, you know, 5, 10, 20, 30 different languages, different character sets. The complexity is really massive. And we've also seen that duplicates exist in so many other areas. At the same point, it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, it absolutely, and but it's still very strange that if you look, for instance, at income that's generated on the publisher side from DSPs, it should essentially be the same process, right? So it is very strange to me that many PROs can wait for a year before they pay out, or 6 months, whereas actually the analytics are there. The payout is on the recorded side, it's monthly, so it's the same source, but because it's organizations that are coming from maybe physical times that are now adjusting to indeed deal with these millions of tracks, or millions of streams. That's what's really an impediment, and that's where the industry and these entities as well should shape up dramatically, in my view.
This is where we need a PRO on the panel, obviously. I mean,
More PROs.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. No.
But just putting it in the perspective of, for example, this year versus last year, or this year versus 5 years ago, are we making progress? Are we heading in the right direction, or are we still, in some countries or some regions, still stuck with the same situations that we've had for 20, 30 years?
I could say that at least in the contractual process, there is definitely progress. We're certainly seeing more. We're seeing less leniency. I remember, 10 years ago, show my age, but 10 years ago when we were negotiating a deal and I would represent a DSP, and the rights holder would say, "This is the data I need," and the DSP would say, "Yeah, I can't really do that." And they'd say,
Here's a
"Okay,
check."
just write me in advance and we're done." And I think those days are gone, for the most part.
So there's an acceptance that there's a responsibility to essentially pay out for every transaction in an ideal world.
Well, no, I think it's more a requirement now. It's definitely less acceptable for anybody who's distributing music to say, "I can't comply with your reporting requirements."
We know the tools are becoming so much more sophisticated, and anyone who has access to artist dashboards is really seeing a lot more of the analytics and optics around where they're being discovered. So it's definitely moving, I think, from that perspective in a good space. But again, that critical match between what happened at a recording level and then who's on the composition, that's still something that I think needs to be solved.
So to be clear, because there are a number of players in the ecosystem, you're talking about the DSPs moving forward and accepting that responsibility. And this is not a PRO bashing session at all, because we all have friends in PROs and we all work with them every day. Are they also making the same sorts of progress?
I
Again,
mean,
it's
there's
a
definitely
regional thing.
there's various initiatives among PROs who are trying to manage their back office and working together. I think there's definitely steps, and they're trying to take their responsibility, but it's apparently not always easy, and it's also not always succeeding.
And what about at a publisher level, Molly, and publisher and songwriter level? What's the change in mentality there?
Well, for example, in Europe, we were the first sort of non-PRO, non-society client of an organization called ICE Services, which does pan-European digital licensing, and is one of the very data and technology focused, and in that way trying to build this partnership and improvement of that chain of information, and that's where we hope to be offering a solution for this segment of the creative community. Register your works, get them out to the society to make sure that they have the information that you are the rights holder of this percentage of whatever that composition is, and then do that as quickly as possible and get that data back on the sort of frequency that should be the standard, and then get those royalties into your system. So we're just focused on constantly aiming to be a part of that solution and helping bring as much composition and recording information as possible, and that's what we're then distributing and hoping that the capacity exists to manage it on the receiving side.
And in the publisher community, are we seeing? I think we are seeing a lot more focus on this, a lot more attention being paid to accuracy in data, because they see that as part of their responsibility as well.
Well, certainly we are. Right. Yeah.
Okay,
but the conversation is more front and center, with the Music Modernization Act in the U.S. Having people talking about songwriters and talking about this gap and the people that aren't matching to their works and not collecting what they're earning is there's definitely more of a conversation than ever. And
Right.
with the with the rate change, the assessment earlier this year, and the increase in digital mechanicals over the next 5 years, that will be hopefully confirmed next month. That changes the sort of focus on this part of the industry that just really hasn't been as critically part of the conversation.
I think that's a really good point, because the conversation is a lot louder now than it was even a year ago. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I didn't work in publishing a year ago, so I didn't know what I was doing.
But people are talking about it. People
Yeah,
are talking about data. They're talking about the need to be accurate. You've got. Sorry.
No,
Peter, go.
absolutely. There's also more openness to collaboration on all sides. That's what we also see, and we're very happy with that as well. Yeah.
That's not something we've always had.
No,
Yeah.
no, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we've started to delve into solutions, and there are a number of ways of looking at how these initiatives are trying to solve these problems. Centralized versus decentralized.
I'm a huge exponent of a one global authoritative database. I recognize that comes with a huge amount of challenges around, among other things, competition, autonomy, authentication, bunch of other issues. But the current system is wildly duplicative. And any data scientist will tell you duplicate data any one of a number of times across a bunch of different operators or metrics or information systems, and you're going to get problems. So one database, the publishing industry tried it, it failed. I don't think that means that people shouldn't try again.
Were some of those issues because of trust, or were they because of data tools not being as sophisticated as they've evolved? What's your sense of that?
I think, well, like all good arguments, right? Depends who you ask. I mean, I think there's there are vested interests. There are a bunch of big operators and small operators who, see that they want their interests served. And you have to agree on a bunch of stuff. I mean, I remember going to the DDEX. If you want to be bored out of your mind, go to a DDEX standards conference, right, and learn about all the various different types of and getting consensus, which took years, many years to get consensus among rights holders about what it should look like. But I think that progress you're talking about can be carried forward. That momentum can now say, okay, let's have one central repository.
I partially agree with you there, which you know that, but so in the ideal world, that's what you want to have, and I agree with that. But I think that there's already quite some initiatives ongoing that are trying to solve this in the market. These can be maybe even partially decentralized databases where there is admission from each other, basically claiming the rights for a specific right set, which can be managed in all sorts of ways. And I think those initiatives will probably evolve faster than a European Union-like negotiation between PROs. But the ultimate goal should be the same, that there's a trusted environment where many parts and components of the industry are collaborative, and that there's joint agreement on what a specific unique set of rights consists of. So yeah, that's my view on it.
You said all that without using the word blockchain.
I deliberately, yeah. So, yeah, so I'm not. I mean, just to add briefly then on that, as your, so this blockchain could be instrumental in this. not completely decentralized, in my view, but perhaps partially, because it could automate the constant dynamics around rights that are changing from hand to hand. That's the only thing I'll say about it. But we are looking at it definitely.
Tends to look like a solution, but in some cases we still have an education issue with songwriters literally just providing and raising a hand via data to say, this is what I own, or here's what changed my estate, or in some other way, some other life change happened, and this is now adjusting. And that's why I think that banking analog is so important, because this isn't something you set once and forget it. It's got to be living and breathing. But to be able to get to blockchain and actually have self-administration, we need administration before self-administration in a sense, or at least a relatively simplified kind of baseline. So I think there's opportunities there to at least set that and then be able to build out of it, of course.
So we've been talking about PROs and DSPs and publishers. These are all organizations that have been part of the ecosystem for decades, hundreds of years. But we're living in a different world now, and one of the changes, and probably even in the last 12 to 24 months, is the rise of the DIY artist, the ability of artists to do it themselves. So what we're talking about becomes even more critical. Thoughts on that? But, you need the ability as an artist to be able to to upload your data and to participate in this without having to go through necessarily one of the existing organizations, if that's your wish.
I think there's a lot of education. So I'm a reluctant, I guess, at age 43, fan of hip hop and dance music, and they're two areas where you see probably a bunch of collaboration, huge number of writers, and I definitely see in the industry people actively going out and trying to educate people about data sets. That's not an easy thing to understand. It's not necessarily something you particularly want to get acclimated to if you're an artist. If I'm honest, which grime artists, data is the first thing on their mind when they're writing the song. It's just not happening.
Yeah, some of the math lately in terms of the amount of new music coming out, and what's equally scary is the projections of 4 times or 5 times as much, whether it's remixes or other works, or works is a bad word in this regard, but other new versions constantly coming out that have components of other songs. The complexity for some of our customers like Dubset, for example, that are trying to be able to bring out and ultimately clear a lot of this. The complexity is super challenging.
Right. So I want to move on a little bit because we've got 5 or 10. Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. There's a sign.
Very clear sign.
Yeah. Very clear. Yeah. And I want to just talk about Asia for a second, because there are unique complexities here around data that we also need to be mindful of. Who'd like to start? Firstly, on the data issues themselves, but also what's happening.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we have to be careful, especially as Westerners, to see Asia as being that one region where it all operates the same, because it's like I'm from Europe, so it's different in each country. So we have different experiences per country. That goes from actually sending hard drives with data to DSPs to sending DDEX files. So there's a wide variety. But I think on the whole, what you definitely see is that there is very positive developments here. I think the way that, what we're seeing, for instance, if, for example, China, we see a lot of changes in the way that DSPs, such as Tencent, treat data, that they're really trying to make their mark. DSPs see copyright as something that is more and more important. 2 years ago, when we started really exploring this region, so to speak, it was a completely different ball game than now. So I'm quite positive about what we see happening, and we're very happy to be part of that, actually.
Okay. Scott, any comments on that?
Yeah, from a globalization standpoint, music travels, and music's traveling more and more. And as different DSPs, different services, it's not just enough to be big or understand only what's happening in your own native country. There's so much consumption happening for all different types of music all around the world. So from that, the complexity around different language character sets, different titles, but the same recording, that's not going away, and it's not getting smaller.
Yeah, we're focused on it in trying to be present here in the region, and we already have an office in Tokyo that we're expanding, and we have an office in Australia, and working on being more of an active partner with the various stakeholders here, and trying to address some of the challenges and some of the sort of legacy rules and regulations that require different kinds of validation of the existence of a work with a physical copy, and that sort of really is outside of how our systems work, when it's mostly, just an artist who's a songwriter being, streamed globally. They're never going to make something physical. We're trying to understand all of these issues and address them, and try to be partners in the solution.
The localization of language is indeed quite important, as Scott also mentioned, because there's in many cases many languages within a country. So the metadata localization, in terms of sending out, being able to send through the right metadata and actually getting paid for it, that's a challenge, I think, for many distributors. We're certainly trying to adapt it to that as much as we can, and have done so, for instance, in Japan, where we now support 3 languages, for instance. Right. But it's it's definitely a development then. Yeah.
So, one minute. We can keep going, but if there's any questions from the audience, we're happy to take 1 or 2. If you shoot your hand up very quickly. Yes, sir. Just yell.
That's Peter from Music. Talk about data here. I mean, we could go into the details of it. My big concern is all this data, which in principle should be called money data, because that's what they get paid on. We shouldn't call it metadata, because people just glaze over and fall asleep. But money data. What if all this data becomes in itself a business? What do you guys in the panel see that having of impacts on the entire idea of having play today, pay tomorrow happening? Because if I start to have a little cash cow going on my data, I'm not going to share it with you guys and you guys and you guys. What do you see that happening? I mean, can that happen, and what would be the consequences, and what can be done if an adverse effect is going to happen?
I think there's definitely no. I mean, there's definitely opportunity for that, as long as the sales data is available, which is generally from the larger DSPs. It's daily, so once you have that, you basically know what your sales are. So if there's financial companies that are willing to kind of secure that data and pay out. And you can have a call on a daily payout before the DSP does, for instance, and then settle that later. That can even be tokenized, for instance, right? You can earn your tokens every day, and you could maybe exchange it at a financial institution. That would probably be one way to address it. And then it becomes kind of a tradable security in a way. Is that one answer to your question?
I wanted to add one other thing too. I think there's the unique analytics and the unique insights that can come out of many of these different scenarios. That, I think, of course, every DSP, every PRO, every songwriter, DIY artist should be able to own that and be able to action on it in their own way. If we end up, though, in a scenario where we haven't normalized the metadata, we're only exacerbating the exact problem, because then transactions become really difficult, and then we end up with bias in it.
And I can add, it's always good for a lawyer to spoil the fun, right? But there are laws that create proprietorial rights around data sets and assets, and there are personal data privacy laws that can affect the way that songwriter information is managed and handled. So that in itself has to be navigated in addition to anything else before you start monetizing.
Great. I'm definitely getting the wind-up call. So I'd like to thank my panelists, Peter, Molly, Gregor, and Scott. Thank you very much.